Hi, this is my review of Commands and Colours Napoleonics, published by GMT. So first up, we'll have a look at the rulebook. It's about 20 odd pages of rules. If you're new to the Commands and Colours system, because it is a system where there's several games with different historical settings, don't be put off by the number of pages in the rules. It's a very well written rulebook, and does a really good job of explaining the core mechanics of the game, such as moving and fire and how the cards work. If you are, if you've played other Commands and Colours games, then there's a lot in here that will be very, very familiar. There are some nuances for this game in the series, and they're mostly things that are sort of specific to the historical Napoleonic theatre. Such as infantry squares, and the infantry can form squares to defend against attacking cavalry, and that works pretty well. And there are combined arms, so when you can use cannon and other infantry or cavalry when attacking, they sort of combine, and that's quite a nice nuance to the game system, and they're all sort of covered here in these pages. Cavalry, retire and reform. So there are a few mechanics that are specific to this game in the series, I would say, and they add that nice bit of flavour, a little bit of historical content and context to the game. But like I said, if you're new to Commands and Colours and you're thinking about which one to get in the series, because there are a few games now, I would say don't be put off by the number of pages of rules. The rulebook is quite detailed, but it's very methodical, and it takes you through how to play the game. I've given this rulebook to people who've never played Commands and Colours before, and they had no problem. I've played a lot of the games in the series, not every single one, and had no problem at all. Very well written, and there are examples of play as well, which is great. So it helps you understand how all the mechanics work. Next up is a scenario rulebook, and this details all the scenarios for the game, and there are a lot. You get a huge amount of content in this game, a huge amount of replayability. I've played through all the scenarios, a lot of them multiple times now, and you just get pages and pages, and each scenario follows the same format in the sense it gives you the historical background, which is great. Tells you how many command cards you'll get, and we'll talk about that in a second. Any victory conditions and any special rules, and each scenario has a sort of different set of those. What I would say, one of the things I like about the Command and Colours series is that it's quite an asymmetrical game for both sides in the scenarios, which I really enjoy. I've just been playing, I think the one I've got set up on the table at the minute, which we're going to have a look at, is the Salamanca, the British attack on the French right. So some of the historical battles will take place over a couple of different scenarios. So for example, there's Quatre Bras, and actual, obviously, famously Waterloo as well. So yeah, you just get a huge amount of scenarios in the game, which is absolutely great. So before we actually have a look at the game set out, I want to talk about the play rates. You're going to use the play rates I have found in playing all the games quite extensively. You get a couple of play rates for any of the rules pertaining to the actual units that you're fielding in the game. And one of the differences between this game in the series and some of the other games in the Command and Colours series is the number of blocks in the units. Super important, especially relating to combat. And this play rate details all that. So, for example, we've got the British Grenadiers and Guard Grenadiers. So it's a nice historical nod. And they both have different dice for combat and different dice on the ignores. Sorry, they can ignore different number of flags on the ignores. So you use this extensively. It's double-sided. One side for the French, one side for the British. I would say, compared to the other Command and Colours games, I have never been able to memorise all the intricacies of both sides, so I use this extensively. You get another player aid to again pertaining to the units. This one I find you use a lot less, but I have it to hand. And then finally, any terrain that the game scenario that is using, and compared to say the Command and Colours Ancients, there's a lot more terrain. But say compared to World War II game, which is Memoir, is probably a lot less terrain, or less types of terrain, I would say. So and everything's beautifully laid out. It's very clear. They're all great player aids, but you will be using them a lot through your play. So here we've got a game set up, and as you can see, each unit is represented by a number of wooden blocks with stickers. It will take you a while to sticker all the blocks as they're double-sided. So your opponent can see, you can both see what the content of the unit is. There are different shaped blocks for the different types. So for example, artillery cannon is sort of a more rectangular shape compared to infantry, which are smaller squares, and leaders again, which are sort of rectangular but stand portrait. The component wise, I've had this game for a long time. The blocks look great still, the stickers have held on really nicely. The board is a mounted board, again very hard wearing. The tiles nicely done. The artwork is, I would describe as it's very functional, if I'm being honest, but pleasant to the eye. And again, the board looks great with all the coloured blocks. I know some people go even further and buy large hexagon type wargaming boards and replace all the blocks with painted figures and things like that. I've seen that at wargame shows. It looks amazing. But as the base game, I think everything here looks great. And every time I play this for someone who's never played it before, they go, "Oh, that's great! Can't wait to play and dive in." And in terms of the mechanics, again, if you're familiar with any of the games in the Commands and Colours series, then you'll take to it like a duck to water, really. If you're completely new, how the game works is that each player has a number of cards. You can play a card in your turn, and the card will let you, broadly speaking, activate a number of units in one of the or more of the three sections of the board. So if you can just about see it on the camera, there's like a central section, and then a right flank, and then a left flank, and they're designated by this sort of dotted line that runs along the board there like that. So for example, if I played this card as the British, I can play a number of units equal to my command, which may be 5 or 6 depending on the scenario. That means I can move a unit and then fire or perform melee combat, and that number of blocks is one unit. So I'll be able to move, and if there were enemy next, within the range, then I would be able to fire at them. And this is where you're going to use that play rate that I talked a lot about. So for example, if I've got here we've got some British line infantry, and I know they're line infantry because they say line infantry on them, and they've got a unique piece of art for the different type. I simply refer to the player aid. There's my line infantry. They're 4 blocks when I set them up. Their musket range is 2 hexagons, and they can move 1 hex and battle. So for example, let's just move a French counter there. So if that French unit was just there, for example, then I could move these guys 1, and then they could perform musketry against the French there. And simply for that, again, I simply refer to the player aid, and it tells me how many dice I will be rolling. So British line infantry for 4 blocks, which these are, they would roll 5 dice, and you have special dice that you get with the game. There they are. And they're stickered as well, so you have to put the stickers on the dice. And when I roll the dice, if I get the infantry symbol, then I inflict a casualty and the block's removed. But there are more symbols, so if I got a cannon symbol, for example, this unit here is not artillery, so that wouldn't have any effect on that unit there. If I get a retreat, then they have to move back. back towards their side of the board. So the actual and that's broadly speaking how the game plays. If you're not familiar with the commands and colours system, if you are familiar, like I said, what is important is the number of blocks, and it's not always one to one. So the British have got great standing fire. So if they move, for example, I should say, if they move, they would have fired two dice against the French. But if they'd stood still, they would be firing 5 dice against the French there. Whereas the French, for example, they would only be rolling 4 dice in the same example if they hadn't moved. They're standing range fire of 4 dice, but they roll more dice in melee, so melee would be when they're right next to each other. So there's a nice sense of asymmetry between the British and the French, which again is a nice nod to the history of Napoleonics. The French used to use tactics with large columns, whereas the British, in this game, are better at the standing ranged fire than the French. The French have more blocks for their cavalry, so they have 4 blocks for their cavalry, whereas look at the British, they have 3 blocks for the cavalry. So again, there's a nice nuance in the history. What I like about this game is that it has enough historical content for me. I play a lot of Napoleonics games, both board games and with minis as well. And there's enough historical content here in a game that can be played quite easily in an hour, or maybe just a little bit over an hour, including setting up the board. Setting up the board takes a little while actually, because you've got to sort all the blocks out and position them. So it's just about, there's enough historical content there for me. I like the fact that there's nuances to the different unit types, again, which is historical nod. I like all the sort of rules pertaining to the historical period that we've talked a bit about. That all adds that historical flavour. And I also like that you can play this game really well against someone who's never played. The actual mechanics of the game are really easy to teach, and you can have a fun, engaging sort of light, but a lot of tactics involved. I think a lot of strategies from the player involved in it comfortably in an evening, and that includes teaching someone for the first time. As I said, I play a lot of Napoleonics games. This is definitely one of my favourite sort of series games in this series, and there are lots of expansions as well, so you can kind of go down the rabbit hole with all the different expansions. But I've got some of those, and I enjoy those, and I enjoy the base game very much on its own. So quality components, well written rules, fun. The Commands and Colours series I think is a great evening, fun, engaging war game with other war gamers or with people who don't play war games, I would say. Now, playing the game solo, I've played the game solo. There are systems and advice from different other war gamers, Stuka Joe, for example, on how to play the game solo. I find it solos pretty well, as in I'm picking cards and making a few choices to the best of the abilities of either side, and it's a fun battle, war game that you can have comfortably in an evening, quite light, which has its place, I think. So yeah, I think a great game in the series. I know a lot of people who love Command and Colours, this is one of their favourite games in the series. So yeah, great stuff, and thanks for watching as ever.